In this lesson, we'll learn what a pivot is and how it can be modified. As we saw in the previous lesson, rotating our lower arm mesh around, see that its pivot is definitely off. That's basically the point at which we're moving this object. So in this case, the lower arm's pivot is centered. Ideally, we'd want its pivot to be right at the elbow. Same thing goes for our hand. If we were to select that, go back to the rotate tool and start to move this around, you can see its pivot is definitely off. We'd want the pivot in this case to be at the wrist. So those are a few things we'll correct in this lesson. Now, to move an object's pivot, we first want to head over to the transform menu. I'll tear this off. I'm going to move this up. And we'll want to make sure that we check on modify object pivot so that no matter where we move the pivot, it will always stay in that place. So that's very important, making sure that that option is turned on. Now, and we'll start with the hand, that's selected, we can go to one of our transform manipulators, either the rotate tool or even the move tool, pressing the V key. From there, we can hold down the Alt button, and now we're in pivot mode. So I'll go ahead and move in the red axis, which is the X-axis. I'll move this back. Selecting the blue axis or Z-axis, I'll move this over. And then selecting the Y-axis or up and down axis, you can go ahead and drag this up. Now it's a good idea to navigate your camera around just to make sure that the pivot is in the right spot. So notice, in my case, I'll probably need to move it a little bit more over in the Z-axis and back in the X-axis. So I'll hold down the Alt key and drag in the Z-axis, again, the blue line, and the X-axis. Great. Now that that's done, if we were to go back to our rotate tool, notice the pivot point has been changed, and now we're able to rotate this wrist a lot better, a lot more naturally. Great. Let's go ahead and do the same for the lower arm. So with that selected, again, we can go to one of our manipulators. I'll go to the move tool, hold down the Alt button, and now we can go ahead and drag in the X-axis, drag this over in the Z-axis, maybe bring this up a little bit more in the Y-axis. Bringing the camera over, looks like we can go ahead and bring this down a little bit more in the Y-axis. Looks like it was brought up too high. Going to more of a top view, again, we can go ahead and bring this over in the Z-axis and back in the X-axis. And now, as we go to our rotate tool, pressing the C key and rotate this, much better. Now this is behaving as the lower arm should. We have that elbow hinge. Wonderful. So you can definitely do the same with the upper arm. You know how to do that now. It's not too necessary in this case, but it was definitely critical that we did that for the lower arm and for the wrist. Okay, so with that said, we also have another way of correcting our object pivots, that's using bones, but we'll get to that subject shortly. What we're going to go ahead and move on to next is working with transform groups in Softimage.